Vaya Bhavam Kila Shruti Saramekam Adhyatmandeepamatiti Shatam Tamonindam Samsarinam Karunayaha Purana Guhyam Tam Vyasasunam Upayami Gurum Muninam Narayanam Namaskritya Naran Shaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswati Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye Nashukraya Shilabhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Tamashloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki Krishnaya Vasudevaya Devaki Nandanaya Cha Nandagopa Kumaraya Govindaya Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivasadi Gaura Bhakta-vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Durgame Patiminantasya Sakalat Paragatir Mahur Swakripa Yastidani and Santa Santa Avamandana. So we're proceeding with our discussions on Vaisnava etiquette. In the last session, we spoke about the Vaisnava etiquettes and why they're important for a Kanishta Adhikari and the role they play in the life of a Kanishta Adhikari. So the concluding point was that because Kanishta Adhikaris, their faith, as is described in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Acharyam eva hare, pujam yat shradayate, natat bhakteṣu chaneṣu, sadbhakta prakrtismrita. This natat bhakteṣu chaneṣu, they don't know how to associate with devotees, but they have faith in the tradition of worshiping the deity. So this is described by Srila Jiva Goswami as being known as Lokika Shraddha. So because their faith is based on Lokika Shraddha, they don't know how to associate with devotees because they don't see how everything connects. So until they're able to develop faith in the Shastra, then they have to be very careful in the rules and regulations of worshiping the deity, which by the nature of following the rules and regulations of worshiping the deity will naturally bring about respect for Vaishnavas, because within the Pancharatrika system, it's said that if one's worshiping the deity and an exalted Vaishnava walks in, one should stop the worship and go offer respect to the Vaishnavas. So these types of rules and regulations will create a culture of being able to offer respect to Vaishnavas. And if the Kanishta Adhikari is sincere in associating with the Madhyama Adhikaris and the Uttama Adhikaris, and they're able to avoid committing offenses, then they'll naturally be able to shift from Lokika Shraddha, which is based on tradition and the sentiments of good and bad according to their definition of morality, which they've been raised with. They'll shift into Shastriya Shraddha, which is the eternal principles which are enunciated by the Mahajanas, the Mahajana Yena Gatasa Pantha. So they will begin to follow a path of life which is regulated by the words of the previous acharyas. So their faith shifts from Lokika Shraddha to Shastriya Shraddha. And that Shastriya Shraddha is ultimately what we as Kanishtas, speaking for myself, have to be cultivating on a daily basis. So the cultivation of that Shastriya Shraddha, alongside what's going to be mentioned in this verse today, is really the life of a Madhyama, or a Kanishta that's trying to shift into the position of being a Madhyama. So there's 4 principles that a Madhyama Adhikari has to follow, and this is highly indicative of Vaishnava etiquette in general, the principles that are being mentioned here. These Vaishnava etiquettes are even followed by Uttama Adhikaris out of their own nature. They also follow these etiquettes, despite the fact they have an equal vision. Mahatmas te samachitta prashantas. Although they have samachitta, they have an equal vision, and they're sudado sadavoyi. They have a heart which is well-wishing to all living entities. They still observe the etiquettes that are going to be mentioned in this verse, for the sake of setting an example, and also just due to their fidelity to the mission of the Lord. Paritharanaya saranam vinashaya duskritam dharma samsartha arthaya sambhavami yuge yuge. So everyone follows these Vaishnava etiquettes, whether one's a Madhyama Adhikārī and Uttama Adhikārī. So studying and understanding the position of the Madhyama Adhikārī can help us understand the qualities we can consciously cultivate. Alongside our study of Shastra, we have to cultivate this disposition in particular that's being mentioned here. So we'll read the verse and I'll read the word for word. And what we're going to do over the next 4 sessions, whenever I speak, is we're going to go through each quality which is being mentioned in the verse. And we're going to speak about how that quality is important in the life of a devotee, and how that quality helps uphold and maintain Vaishnava culture, and gives more facility for the people in general to take to Krishna consciousness. So we'll read the verse together. īśvare tad-adhīneṣu.
īśvare tad-adhīneṣu.
bāliśeṣu dviṣatsu.
bāliśeṣu dviṣatsu.
prema-maitrī-kṛpopekṣā.
prema-maitrī-kṛpopekṣā.
karoti madhyamaḥ.
karoti madhyamaḥ.
īśvare. Under the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
Under the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
tad-adhīneṣu.
tad-adhīneṣu.
Persons who have taken fully to Krishna consciousness.
Persons who have taken fully to Krishna consciousness.
bāliśeṣu.
bāliśeṣu.
Under the neophytes or the ignorant.
Under the neophytes of ignorance.
dviṣatsu.
dviṣatsu.
To persons envious of Krishna and Krishna's devotees.
To persons envious of Krishna and Krishna's devotees.
Cha.
And
Prema. Love. Maitri. Friendship. Kripa. Mercy. Upekṣā. Negligence. Ya. Anyone who. Karoti. Does. Sa. He. Madhyama. A second-class devotee. Translation and purport by the disciples of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Translation: a intermediate or second-class devotee called Madhyama Adhikārī offers his love to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is a sincere friend to all the devotees of the Lord, shows mercy to the ignorant people who are innocent, and disregards those who are envious of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So we'll read a part of this purport. This is actually an extremely instructive purport, and I recommend everyone read it in their own time, because it speaks heavily about the position of a Madhyama Adhikārī in relationship to envious people.
What is the verse?
īśvare tad-adhīneṣu. 11-46. So it speaks heavily about this point, about why the disposition of a Madhyama Adhikārī, or a devotee who's in an intermediate stage, which is the stage that we should be aspiring for, actually. We should be setting our sights on becoming properly qualified Madhyama Adhikārīs. Because one can be a Madhyama Adhikārī coming from the Kanishta stage, or one can be a Madhyama Adhikārī coming from the Uttama stage. Prabhupada sometimes says coming down, but it's not that they come down from the position of being an Uttama Adhikārī, but they adjust their consciousness for the activities of a Madhyama Adhikārī in order to show mercy to living entities in a more broadcasted way. Because if one's just functioning as an Uttama Adhikārī, generally they'll be engaged in bhajan. They won't necessarily be interested in the activities of giving Krishna consciousness to others, because they feel that everyone is more Krishna conscious than themselves. They have a very high vision for all living entities, and they see within all living entities their underlying Krishna conscious nature. So they see that potential within everyone, and or they see that that's what's functioning at all times, that actually these coverings of the material conditioning are temporary, but actually everyone is favorably disposed towards Krishna. It's just due to association with the Mahatattva, the living entity seems to be adverse to Krishna, bhayam viniveshatasya. But it's not actually the case. The living entity is always inclined towards Krishna. Even in the material sense, the living entity is inclined towards Krishna's external energy. So this is the vision of the Uttama Adhikari. Yastu sarvani bhutani atmanam atman upashate. Sarva bhuteṣu chatmanam tatuna vijigupsate. They see everything in relationship to Krishna and Krishna in relationship to everything. And actually they see Krishna constantly in everything. Everything they see, it reminds them of Krishna, and they're having full spurti of Krishna. And this is what Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains is the difference between a Madhyama Adhikārī and an Uttama Adhikārī. An Uttama Adhikārī has a constant vision of Krishna, whereas a Madhyama Adhikārī doesn't have vision of Krishna. So even if the Uttama Adhikārī comes to the position of being a Madhyama Adhikārī, they don't lose that vision of Krishna. So the Uttama Adhikārī, he sees everything in relationship to Krishna and Krishna in relationship to everything. And because of this, tato na vijigupsate, he has nothing to hate. So he has to adjust his consciousness in such a way that he can come from that exalted stage to fix himself for the position of being a Vaishnava preacher. An Uttama Adhikārī coming from the position of being a Madhyama Adhikārī is extremely effective in spreading the Krishna consciousness movement. So there's a strong need for Uttama Adhikārīs to actually take this role. And we see this in the life of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, see this in the life of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and we see this in the life of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, that they adjusted their consciousness for the missionary activities of a Madhyama Adhikārī. So although they may be Uttama Bhaktas, they're functioning in the role of a Madhyama Adhikārī. Whereas those Kanishtas who are coming to the stage of Madhyama Adhikārīs, the Acharyas explained in their commentaries that they're supposed to act as the right hand of the Uttama Adhikārīs for executing the mission of the Lord. So that's just a bit of an overview of the distinction between a Madhyama Adhikārī and an Uttama Adhikārī. Because just because Uttama Adhikārī may be displaying the activities of a Madhyama Adhikārī does not mean that they're necessarily a Madhyama Adhikārī. They have spurti of Krishna, and that's what qualifies them as an Uttama Adhikārī, an Uttama Bhakta. So I just wanted to read some particular sections of this purport because they're very instructive in relationship to this dviṣatsu. Because many times it's easy for a Kanishta Adhikārī to criticize the activities of a Madhyama Adhikārī due to a Madhyama Adhikārī's disposition of dviṣatsu. Basically, a Kanishta Adhikārī tries to artificially take the position of an Uttama Adhikārī, and they don't know how to behave in relationship to broadcasting the holy name to the public and what's actually beneficial for the world. So there's a few things I'm going to read. I'm going to read from the beginning of what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur says. And then what we'll do is I'll discuss it a little bit, and then we'll open it up for discussion. But there's actually a lot in this purport, and the majority of it is discussing about this quality of dviṣatsu. Because this dviṣatsu principle is something which can be highly overlooked as a Kanishta transitioning into a Madhyama. That due to a false sense of compassion, due to a false sense of sentimentality, one shows compassion to those who aren't qualified, and those unqualified people create a disturbance in the society of Vaishnavas. So an expert Madhyama Adhikārī knows how to protect the society of Vaishnavas while simultaneously engage the innocent in Krishna's service. So we'll read this because it's extremely instructive, and then I'll discuss it a little bit, and then we'll have a discussion. Is that okay?
Yes.
Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur has given an elaborate explanation to prove that the discrimination employed by a Madhyama Adhikārī preacher does not at all show a lack of mercy. He states that upekṣā, or neglect, as mentioned in this verse, is the proper medicine for those who are inimical to the Supreme Lord and his devotees. Indifference from the preacher checks feelings of hostility on both sides. Although there is a Vedic injunction that one should cut out the tongue of a person who offends the Supreme Lord and his devotees in this age, it is best simply to avoid potential offenders and thus prevent them from committing further sinful activities against the Vaishnavas. It is the duty of a Vaishnava preacher to point out the futility of any process besides surrendering to the Supreme Lord. An envious person, however, will resent such strong preaching by a Vaishnava and disrespect him, considering the devotee to be unnecessarily criticizing others. Such a person who cannot appreciate the mercy of Vaishnavas should be neglected. Otherwise, according to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, his cheating mentality will increase day by day. Those who are attracted to the Sankirtan movement of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and who disrespect the faithful servants of Lord Chaitanya, considering their strong statements about the Sankirtan movement to be obstacles to their own worship of the Lord, will never be able to fix their mind on Krishna, but will gradually fall down from the path of devotion by confusing the external activities of the material world with the actual worship of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. Such bewilderment has been expressed by the words Bhayam viniveshita syat. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur has strongly rejected those foolish persons who, under a plea of mercy and equal vision, perceive that a faithless person is also a devotee of the Supreme Lord, and who thus try to thrust the Harinam, or the holy name of God, onto such offensive people. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta has stated, when childish people think themselves Mahabhagavats and act in defiance of the Vaishnava spiritual master, such behavior simply holds them back from receiving the mercy of the Vaishnava Guru. Bewildered by false ego, these self-proclaimed devotees gradually become fit to be ignored by pure devotees on the intermediate platform and are cheated of the mercy that comes from the devotee satisfaction. Thus, they become asadu by constantly committing offenses against the devotees who preach the holy name of Krishna. Pure devotees, therefore, in all circumstances, display indifference to those who falsely imagine themselves to be Vishuddha Bhaktas, or pure devotees of the Lord. This indifference is an excellent manifestation of their mercy. In other words, those who criticize the Vaishnava preachers on the second-class platform for discriminating between those who are fit to receive the Lord's mercy and those who are simply envious are misunderstanding the mission of the Lord. Krishna himself states in Bhagavad Gita, Paritranaya sadunam vinasaya chaduskritam, dharma samstapan arthaya, sambhavami yuge yuge. To deliver the pious and to annihilate the miscreants, as well as to reestablish the principles of religion, I advent myself millennium after millennium. Even such a great Vaishnava as Shukadeva Goswami, one of the 12 Mahajans in this universe, expressed this contempt for the evil Kamsa. Srila Jiva Goswami has pointed out that even though a Mahabhagavat devotee may act on the second-class platform for preaching, his rejection of the envious living entities does not obstruct his vision of the Lord as all-pervading. Rather, when a first-class devotee or even a second-class devotee rejects the atheistic class of men, he is expressing the mission of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. A first-class or second-class devotee never actually becomes envious of another living entity, but out of intense love for the Supreme Lord, he becomes angry when the Lord is offended. Also, understanding the Lord's mission, he discriminates according to the position of a particular living entity. To consider such a Vaishnava preacher an ordinary envious person, or to consider him sectarian because of his proclamation of pure devotional service as the most exalted of all methods of spiritual advancement, reflects a materialistic vision called Vaisnava Jati Bhuti, or Gurisu Naramati. Such an offense drags the offender down to a hellish condition of life by the laws of nature. We see in this verse how one of the qualities of a Madhyama Adhikārī is that he speaks strongly. Tato du sanga utsreja satsuj sajeta bhutiman sadava santa eva sichindanti manovya sangam uktivihi. This is expressed by Krishna in the, or I think it's Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, where he explains that a sadhu is one who speaks in such a way that he's able to santas eva sichindanti manovyasangam uktivihi. He's able to cut away the manovyasangam. Manovyasangam means over-absorption in the material energy. So a Kanishta Adhikārī may speak strongly, but instead of cutting away one's material attachments, they cut away one's attachment to Krishna. Whereas a Madhyama Adhikārī, knowing how to deal with different people, they know how to speak in such a way to filter out the envious and simultaneously cut away the attachments of those who are envious. So those who are envious, they'll hear the strong preaching of a Vaishnava, and they may display a external feeling of appreciation and respect, but internally and through their actions, they display an envious disposition. So a Madhyama Adhikārī is perceptive of this envious disposition, and due to that perception of this envious disposition, they display indifference, because they see that their words, which are meant to act as a operational knife to cut away people's material attachments, the person is, due to their stubborn obstinance, their immemorial obstinance to reject the Lord, that operating instrument is not working. It's having an opposite effect on one's practicing Krishna consciousness. So if the Madhyama Adhikārī continues to speak to those who are envious, then they'll sever their attachment for Krishna. So the Madhyama Adhikārī, in order to let that person become ripe, displays this disposition of upekṣā, of neglect, in order to allow that living entity to progress in the material world, let the shackles of the material energy tighten. And when the shackles of the material energy tighten, naturally they have to become humble. So although a Madhyama Adhikārī may neglect a living entity who's envious of Krishna or envious of the message of the Srimad Bhagavatam, they simultaneously maintain the good feelings within their heart. Sudara sadavoye. They maintain this feeling of magnanimity in the heart, where they feel that let this person become Krishna conscious. I may not be able to speak the message to them now, but let them become Krishna conscious in due course of time. And those blessings are actually explained by Srila Rupa Goswami in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, as being a catalyst for that personality to become a Kripa Siddha in the future. That through those good wishes of the Vaishnava, that personality can become a Kripa Siddha. And we see in the life of Jagai and Madai, this was the case, that although they were envious of Nityananda Prabhu, directly envious of Haridas Thakur and Nityananda Prabhu, because Nityananda Prabhu had a feeling in his heart, let these people become Krishna conscious. You see that because of his wishes, the Lord granted that desire to Nityananda. So if one can cultivate this quality of upekṣā in relationship to envious people, while simultaneously cultivating this quality of sudada sadavoye, this Vaishnava quality of sudada, of being the well-wishing friend to all living entities in all circumstances, feeling let them become Krishna conscious, Krishna matirastu, let you please become Krishna conscious. while simultaneously neglect them from in terms of physical proximity, then due to the desire of the devotee functioning as a Madhyama Adhikārī, the Lord will fulfill that desire in due course of time. And evidence of this is found in the pastime of Jagai and Madhai, that due to the wishes of the Vaishnava, they were transformed. And we also see this in the life of, I forget his name, but he was a disciple of Narottam Das Thakur. He was considered to be more sinful than Jagai and Madhai. But because Narottam Das Thakur was called upon by his family for him to become Krishna conscious, and he blessed him for him to become Krishna conscious, he was transformed. And his faith in Narottam Das Thakur, the story of it actually became a shining example of Guru Bhakti. So people can change, but they may not change at the pace that we want them to change at. So a Madhyama Adhikārī is patient with the mission of the Lord, seeing that Krishna has his plan for every living entity, and it's possible that the living entity has to go through a few more kicks before they can accept the message. But if a neophyte devotee sees the strong preaching of a Vaishnava and blames the strong preaching of the Vaishnava for people not taking to Krishna consciousness, or blames the strong preaching of the Vaishnava for people leaving that message, or he neglects people who aren't receptive to that message, that neophyte occurs the offense which is being mentioned here, Vaishnava ye jati bhuti, or gureshu naramati. That because they don't understand how the Lord's mission functions, and they think themselves on the level of being a Mahabhagavat, but actually they're completely incompetent to preach Krishna consciousness themselves. And Jiva Goswami says that Kanishtas are useless for preaching activities. He says that. And it's because of this mentality that they have. They have an overly accommodating idea of how Krishna consciousness is supposed to work. When they develop a little bit of utsaha mayi, they become overly enthusiastic to give Krishna consciousness to others. And so they're not able to discriminate between who is ready to receive Krishna consciousness and who's not. And when they see a Madhyama Adhikārī exhibiting that discrimination, they become offensive. So the Kanishta Adhikārī has to mature in their Krishna consciousness, and they should not engage in preaching activity which is beyond their adhikar, which is beyond their level of qualification. They should only begin to shift into the level of preaching activities and giving Krishna consciousness to others once they have developed what's known as Shastriya Shraddha. Because then they can begin to appreciate the discrimination which is exhibited by the Madhyama Adhikārī. So the Madhyama Adhikārī is a shining example as to what Vaishnava etiquette is. The four qualities which a Madhyama Adhikārī exhibits is really the qualities which a Pakka Vaishnava will carry in all circumstances. They know how to create friendship with the devotees. They know how to offer their love to Krishna, and they know how to neglect those who are envious and simultaneously show mercy to those who are innocent. So this is the discrimination and the gravity of a Madhyama Adhikārī, to be able to see who is ready for what at what time. So this is a very subtle point, and often it can be overlooked for the sake of accommodating others. But one thing is that when we try to present a message which is a bit wishy-washy, we actually lose our capacity for discrimination, because we're trying to accommodate a larger audience without actually giving the message of just repeating what's being spoken by the acharyas. You'll find that when you preach the message of Bhagavad Gita, or you preach the message of Srimad Bhagavatam, there's this effect where it really separates the cream from the milk. You can kind of get a clear distinction to see who's ready and who's not. And if due to trying to accommodate others in an immature way, one waters down the message, one loses the discrimination to see who is actually ready to take up Krishna consciousness and who's not ready to take up Krishna consciousness. So one could be, as it's being said here, they could, under the plea of mercy and equal vision, perceive that a faithless person is also devotee of the Supreme Lord, and thus try to thrust the holy name of God onto such offense. So although someone may be offensive to Vaishnavas, if someone adjusts their preaching in order to accommodate those people, then actually they're engaging in an offense to the Vaishnava society, because they're, as it says here, otherwise, according to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, his cheating mentality will increase day by day. So they may be chanting offensively, they may be committing offenses to Vaishnavas, and because one's creating an atmosphere which is trying to accommodate those people, their offenses actually are increasing. So it's better to neglect them and give time and energy to those who are innocent. This is a very important point, something to meditate on, something to think about. And there's a very lengthy purport. There's many things which were said. But when I was reading this last night, I felt this was very, very important for devotees to read and understand. So I think we have 10 minutes left, correct?
Yeah.
So we can open it up for discussion.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you so much for that.
Make sure pay attention to the online, because sometimes they have questions. Last time Vishal had a question, but we finished up early.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. So thank you so much for that wonderful explanation on I guess aspiration to become a Madhyama Adhikārī and how one should carry oneself in that role. It's more a reflection. I really like that point you mentioned about like how we're dependent on mercy of devotees to finally practice Krishna consciousness, and that basically, in my head, it tied to the first offense, Satam Ninda. Like if you're closing the door on the only thing that can allow us to practice Krishna consciousness by offending a Vaishnava, like we have no hope. So that's probably the most important one to guard against.
Yeah, and actually, if one doesn't observe this principle of upeksha, they become involved in the ninth offense of preaching the holy name to those who are faithless. But then inadvertently, due to preaching the holy name to those who are faithless, they can potentially become entangled in Vaishnava aparad. They can be an accomplice to Vaishnava aparad unknowingly. So we have to be careful.
Would you like to take online first?
Is there anyone on there? We'll alternate back and forth.
Okay. Anyone online can go ahead.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. I had one question, Prabhu. So you mentioned, yes, Prabhu. So Prabhu, you mentioned that our aim should be to move towards Madhyama Adhikārī. How do we learn more about the path there? How do we know we are actually making progress towards that? And where can we learn more about this, Prabhu?
Yeah, so what Jiva Goswami says in his Bhakti Sandarbha, when I was researching this topic last night, was that the quality of a Kanishta, one who's on the level of a Kanishta Adhikārī, their faith is predominated by Lokika Shraddha, which means that their motivation to engage in Krishna consciousness is not based on the statements of the Shastra, but it's based on their perception of what's good and bad according to the tradition they've been brought up in. It's more or less based on their guna and karma. So the way one can understand they're shifting into a Madhyama Adhikārī stage is that their faith in Krishna consciousness is not being guided by feeling this is a good thing, or for instance, like a Westerner, how could the tradition be there? Because for a Westerner, someone may come to Krishna consciousness on the basis of trying to get free from material distress. So they like being with devotees because it's a better alternative to the life of sin and intoxication and degradation they were living previously. Or they had an inclination to meditation and they want to learn how to meditate and they want to learn how to do these things. And they feel meditation and a sattvic type of lifestyle is good. So for a Westerner, that shift should go from just being based on the reasons why they came to Krishna consciousness to staying in Krishna consciousness due to the statements of the Shastra. For an Indian, it's obvious what would bring someone to Krishna consciousness initially, because it's tradition. You're raised in a Hindu household. You understand the value of living a God-centered life. So it's motivated by an upbringing, more or less. Whereas a Westerner may be motivated by, also motivated by an upbringing, but it's the other end of the spectrum. It's let me get out of this upbringing. So the shift should go from feeling I'm doing this because I think it's a good thing to do, to doing this because this is what Krishna says to do.
Mm.
So my Guru Maharaj often says that for a Kanishta Adhikārī, Krishna is a thing. But for a Madhyama Adhikārī, Krishna is the thing. And it's the thing on the basis of what they've studied from Shastra and what they've heard from qualified Vaishnavas. The faith has developed due to Shada Shabde Vishwas Kohe, Sudrit Nishchai, Krishna Bhakti Koila Sarva Karma Kritahai. That Krishna Bhakti, Shada Shabde, that what one has heard, Shada Shabde Vishwas Kohe, that faith is developed. Krishna Bhakti Koila Sarva Karma Kritahoi, that if I just engage in bhakti, then Sarva Karma Kritahoi, then all my other karmas are wrapped up. I don't need to worry about anything else if I just give my 100% time and attention to engaging in devotional service. Whereas a Kanishta Adhikārī may think, yeah, devotional service is nice, but we also have to, be attentive to, making sure we observe these different rituals for Durga Puja or for Ganesh Puja, or we have to make sure that we observe all these, rules and regulations of how to conduct a wedding.
Yeah.
Trying to think of something. How to conduct a wedding, or that all of these things, Krishna consciousness is nice, but let me take care of these things first. That I can't do this unless I take care of these things first. I have to do these things and then I can practice Krishna consciousness. But for one who's existing as a Madhyama Adhikārī, their faith is based on the fact that they are fixed in the principles of Shastra. So they understand that just by engaging in the devotional service of Krishna, all my other karmas are wrapped up. All my other karmas are wrapped up. I don't need to worry about all the things for the wedding. I don't need to worry about this ritual or that ritual, and this sadhya and that sadhya, or this titi and that titi. But a Vaishnava becomes concerned about those things in relationship to Krishna. So a Madhyama Adhikārī, instead of being concerned about the titis which may bring about good karma, they're concerned about the titis which increase devotion for the Lord, the Madhava titi. So this is the distinction between a Kanishta Adhikārī and a Madhyama Adhikārī. Is the Madhyama Adhikārī functions principally on the basis of Shastriya Shada. They're guided by Shastriya Shada. They may not be fully conversant in the principles of Shastriya Shada, but they are convinced enough where their faith is quite strong. They can make forward progress and convince others as well in their own capacity according to the level of advancement. They can convince others to practice Krishna consciousness. Whereas a Kanishta Adhikārī, his faith is very weak. And if one thing gets said which kind of alters that traditional understanding of how things are supposed to be, they could leave the path of devotional service. It's a case-by-case basis. So that's my humble understanding of this, Vishal. Does that help?
Perfect. Yes, Prabhu. Thank you so much. Prabhu, you mentioned Bhakti Sandarbha, where we can read more about it.
I wouldn't recommend reading Bhakti Sandarbha. I mean, you could, but I would recommend reading this purport.
Okay.
Specifically, these three purports. These three purports are very important. Also, Srila Prabhupada speaks about this principle a lot: Kanishta, Madhyama, and Uttama. So I would say first study Srila Prabhupada's books and study Srimad Bhagavatam. And only after thoroughly thread-bearing what's in Prabhupada's books and in the Srimad Bhagavatam, then you can consider looking at what Jiva Goswami says in the Sandarbhas. But many times devotees become top-heavy. They want to jump through the Acharya's commentaries and they completely neglect what Prabhupada's saying. But actually, we should see what Prabhupada says and assimilate what Prabhupada says, and then corroborate everything the Acharyas say in relationship to Srila Prabhupada's move.
Perfect.
So I
Thank you.
recommend devotees read commentaries so early on in their Krishna consciousness, unless they're functioning under a devotee who has evaluated their progress over the course of many years, and they're taking guidance from that devotee to study those commentaries and those things are saying. Otherwise, we become top heavy, and we can neglect Prabhupada's mood. And Prabhupada's mood is good for us, actually, for assimilating all these topics. Otherwise, we'll just become more like jnanis rather than bhaktas. So the path of devotion is like walking on a tightrope. You can either shift into like a more like a jnani type of perspective, which is like renunciation, tyaga, or you can shift into like a bhoga type of perspective, just enjoyment. So rocking in devotional service is like walking in a tightrope. One has to keep a balance between renunciation and enjoyment, and not fall to either side, but walk the straight path of bhakti. And what keeps us fixed in that is assimilating the teachings that Srila Prabhupada has given, because Srila Prabhupada has been specifically empowered to engage the world in Krishna service. Specifically, it's just many times we speak of Srila Prabhupada as being a Shakti Avesh avatar. So what is his empowerment? That he's able to engage the entire world in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's service. So understanding his purport, understanding his mood, understanding his mission in relationship to our devotional advancement and our understanding of the Shastra is fundamental to making healthy advancement in Krishna consciousness. Does that make sense, Vishal?
Yes, Prabhu. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna. You had something?
Oh, Hare Krishna. Yes, Prabhu. I was feeling a little bit confused by some of these.
I can't. You have to.
Sorry. Hare Krishna. Yeah, I was feeling a little confused by some of these statements. So you said that for Kanishta Adhikārī, Krishna is a thing, whereas for Madhyama Adhikārī, Krishna is the thing.
Yeah.
So Kanishta Adhikārī, he may think that bhakti is important, but I have to take care of other things first.
Yeah.
And Madhyama Adhikārī, he knows that basically he has to follow the Shastra and follow Krishna says. And on the other hand, you're saying that when somebody is like being very utsahamai or like over enthusiastic, then one does not distinguish between like who is qualified to receive the message and who is not qualified, and one may even kind of criticize people who are discriminating.
Yeah.
So I think these moods are very little conflicting. Like if somebody is utsahamai, then isn't he like kind of he's considering Krishna as the thing?
No, because here's the thing. Generally speaking, a Kanishta Adhikārī, although they try to preach, Krishna is still just a thing.
Okay.
Krishna is still just a thing. If Krishna is the thing, then they understand the mood of a Madhyama Adhikārī. Then they understand the mood of Madhyama Adhikārī and they respect that mood. The thing is that na bhakteṣu chanteṣu, the Kanishta Adhikārī doesn't know how to relate with advanced devotees. And they themselves try to preach Krishna consciousness. So when they try to preach Krishna consciousness, generally their understanding of preaching Krishna consciousness is artificially adopting the mood of an Uttama Adhikārī, without taking into consideration that an Uttama Adhikārī actually exhibits the quality of upekṣā in their behavior. So they develop an artificial, what's the word I'm looking for? Kira, what's the word I'm looking for? An artificial, like universal vision, like universal brotherhood type of vision. And they think everyone's qualified to practice Krishna consciousness. Let me engage everyone in Krishna service. But they're not qualified to actually distinguish between who's ready to receive the message and who's not ready to receive the message. So they create havoc in their own life and the society of Vaishnavas. So they try to make Krishna consciousness accessible, but they either water down the message according to their level of faith, because their faith is driven by tradition. So if they're a Westerner, they present things which are kind of sattva guni. And if they're Indian, they kind of present things which are traditional or ritualistic. and they just dilute the pure message of the Bhagavad Gita, actually. So this is the problem when Kanishta Adhikari. This is why Jiva Goswami says that Kanishta Adhikaris are useless for preaching activity. Because a Madhyama Adhikari can speak strongly in such a way that he can filter out those who are sincere and cultivate those who are sincere. Filter out those who are insincere and then cultivate those who are sincere. Whereas a Kanishta Adhikari may be overly accommodating. Maybe overly accommodating. In the process of overly accommodating, they lose the message altogether, and things become more focused about psychology or people's emotions or people's feelings, and they basically shift into, rather than upholding the presentation of the Shastra which has been given by the previous acharyas, they try to accommodate iśvare samutena davat mohena bharata. They try to facilitate the mental platform of today's modern society, which is always shifting. So basically, one becomes a servant to modern day morality rather than a servant of the transcendental morality of the acharyas in Krishna. That's the problem. That's the point that's being made. That makes sense?
Yes, true, makes sense. Yeah, one key point that I got from the message is that if Krishna was the thing, then they would accept the Shastra, and they would be knowing how to relate with the devotee, and they would understand the word of the.
And they'll also present the message as Krishna presents it. That's the thing, is a Kanishta Adhikari generally won't present that message because they don't have full faith in that message. So they'll present what they have faith in, which is generally a watered down traditional understanding according to their guna and karma.
Okay.
Whereas a Madhyama Adhikari simply repeats what he hears from the spiritual master. This commentary here, there's this beautiful point that's made. I'll just find it. Yeah. There's another duty which an Uttama Adhikari has. So in this regard, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur mentions that it is the duty of the Madhyama Adhikari to extend himself as the right hand of the Uttama Adhikari, vowing to work for the benefit of others and offering help in distributing love of God, love of Krishna. So showing mercy to the innocent isn't separate from the Madhyama Adhikari's service to the Uttama Adhikari. So showing mercy to the innocent is an expression of the Madhyama Adhikari's service attitude to the Uttama. So the devotee on the intermediate stage who's accepted the service of preaching, their innocent, their mercy on the innocent, kṛpopekṣā, the mercy that they extend to the public, that is an expression of their service to the Mahabhagavat. Whereas a Kanishta just presents things according to his mental understanding of Krishna consciousness, because he hasn't shifted into Shastriya Shraddha. He's functioning on the platform. His faith is based on Lokika Shraddha. So what he can give is what he has. So he's not functioning as an emissary of the Uttama Adhikari. He's functioning as a servant of his own mental concoction of Krishna consciousness. So it's better for a Kanishta Adhikari to try to serve the Madhyama Adhikaris and serve the Uttama Adhikaris and not become overly involved in preaching activity until it has been confirmed by superior Vaishnavas that that person's faith has shifted from Lokika Shraddha to Shastriya Shraddha, and that person within can see that their motivation for practicing Krishna consciousness is the desire to serve the message of the Guru Parampara, rather than just serve a message which accommodates the morality of the modern day, which is generally the preaching of a Kanishta Adhikari. It tries to facilitate the morality of the modern day, and therefore they create havoc in the preaching world. And then people develop a convoluted perception of what Krishna consciousness is.
Thank you.
Is that okay?
Yes.
That makes sense?
Yes. It's a packed class too. Lot of material. I really liked how he differentiated Uttama and Madhyama. That Uttama comes on
on the platform of Madhyama, although he is still maintaining this vision of seeing Krishna. This would be, the vision is still there, but he does it in order to give mercy. And while he's doing it, he may give the mercy even to those who are envious, like we see the example of Jagai and Madai by his desire, by their desire, and they might even sometimes neglect, as the purport says somewhere. Sometimes the saints, the sages, they preach, and sometimes they don't.
Yeah, this is a point that's made by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur actually.
Yeah, there's
he says Shukadev Goswami. It says here that even such a great Vaishnava as Shukadev Goswami, who's Aswanubhava Makila Shati Sadamekam Adhyatman Deepam Atiti Shatam Tam Munindam Samsarinam Karunayaha Purana Guyam, who spoke the Srimad Bhagavatam out of Karunayaha, out of compassion. Even he expressed his contempt for the evil Kamsa.
So it is not easy to understand the mood of Uttama Adhikārī and Madhyama Adhikārī, especially for a Kanishta who doesn't have Shastric understanding. So one should be very careful of observing the Vaisnava etiquette, which is they guard us from committing offense to both Madhyama and Uttama Adhikārī. And they also help us to go to the next platform.
The Vaishnava etiquette, I think I said this in the last class, it acts as like a fence to protect us, to protect the Bhakti creeper from the offenses. And so that fence protects us. So Vaishnava etiquette is like a fence. Sadachar. Achar Pacharana Makari Durikar, Tumi Sarvaguru Tumi, Jagatir Arya. So this Sadachar that's mentioned in this purport actually. Vaishnava etiquette is Sadachar. So this verse is actually the essence of Vaishnava etiquette. This and Chanada Pisa Nichena, these are like the guiding principles for Vaishnava etiquette. But this is how one deals with different types of people. There's a distinction on how one deals. Anything else? Anything online? No?
Yes, we have two more devotees. If they have questions, they can go.
Is it okay?
But we are already
8:11.
8:11.
Yeah, we can stop here.
Okay. All right. Anyone who has any questions, they can message me personally on WhatsApp.
Or they can post on the
They can post on the Bhagavatam discussion, or they can message me personally. Okay, so thank you everyone. Vancha kalpatarum visya kripa sindhu devacha bhavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha jata jata bhakta gane vase vrindavane namara shridaram savaracharane.
Devavrata Prabhu ki
Jai.
Srila Prabhupada